All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining today. We just wanted to get some time together here, get a quick 30-minute pit stop call, just covering some pre-plant stuff. Some things to keep in mind here as we're getting ready to grind the rest off and get into the growing season. So I think we're all excited. We got that 70-degree weather last week. We had that nice warm weather. I think we're all starting to get the itch to get back out in the field, especially myself. So yeah, unfortunately we had the weather cool off a little bit this week and next, but I think planting season is going to be here before we know it, and it's gonna move fast this year. So there's no doubt about that. So all right. So first off, and I shared this last year, but I always like talking about, beginning with the end in mind. So looking at what your goal is for the end of the year. So everyone's got different goals. One may get done first, if you want to be the one to get done first. That's always a potential goal. Nothing wrong with that. Growing early maturities, getting things going quicker. Nothing wrong with that. Next could be saving the most money. Maybe you want to, I know we've had astronomical fertilizer prices this year, so finding ways to cut back, thinking about different ways you can manage it that way. And then the others could just be, give it the Cadillac treatment. Just want to raise the most bushels. You want to be the one bragging at the coffee shop, talking about how great everything was, which is great too. But realistically, it's going to be a combination of the first. You want to get done timely, but you don't necessarily want to be the first one done because you could be leaving some bushels out there. You want to save some money where you need to, but you don't want to just try to save your way and then just, swap and plant all beans or cut back too much on nitrogen. And then you want to raise the most bushels. So what it really comes down to is a combination of the three is just optimizing the yield for your operation. So the next question is how do you optimize your yield potential? So I'm going to work backwards through this here. So the first off you need big healthy plants. You need those plants soaking in sunlight, turning that sunlight into energy, and turning that energy into grain, turning into bushels. So that's what it comes down to. You need big healthy plants. To get those big healthy plants, you need uniform growth. You don't see too many fields out there that look like, hold on, let me get my laser pointer going. You don't have too many fields that look like this. And at the end of the year, it catches you off guard and holy cow, that field made 250 bushels. I don't know how. Typically, maybe it made 250 in spots, but you average across the field, it's not going to do that. So you want uniform growth throughout the year. And then how do you get that uniform growth is you need good stands. So you need every plant coming in up at the same time. It's important to know that stand is not determined until V6. And the reason is that V6 is when the plant is no longer reliant on the stored energy of the seed. So you can cut off the mesocotyl and the corn will still find it will not impact yield. Any damage to the seed or the mesocotyl before V6 is going to hurt yield. It's going to slow the plant down. And it's also important to know is that any plant that is 2 growth stages or more behind its neighbors is essentially a weed. At that point, by the time you get to the end of the year, that plant that's 2 stages behind is going to have a little nubbin of an ear compared to its neighbors. And then the neighbors are going to lose nutrients because that plant that was behind was still trying to catch up and put on a good ear. So at that point, it's better to, what would have been best for the crop is to get rid of that plant that's 2 growth stages behind and then reallocate those nutrients towards the plants that are good, its neighbors. So important to know that. And then also the other thing to wrap on is at V6, roughly that time is when the plant is trying to figure out, it's trying to determine what its yield potential is going to be. So having a clean, healthy field at that time, reducing stress is going to help optimize your yield potential for the year. Now, luckily, most of our hybrids have some amount of flex, whether it be semi-flex or fully flex ears. So there's some changes there. So if you start off, have a rough early year and then things get better, the ear does have the potential to flex out and get a little more yield out of it. But for the most part, you're determining the girth of the ear at that V6 time. So, and then finally, the question is, how do you get that uniform stand? So that's what we need a uniform stand. Well, the number one thing, unfortunately, is out of all of our control, which is weather. So if, like 2019, if Mother Nature turns on the irrigation and then we just get rain all spring, there's not a whole lot that we can do about that. So that's unfortunate, but that's the game we play. So next is plant nutrition. So you need to have adequate and accessible plant nutrition. Keeping those fields clean early, you're not planting into a weed patch, is going to help you out a lot. Those weeds just rob nutrition. They take the nutrients that you put out for your corn, they tie it up, and then the corn has no ability to use it. The one thing I will say is features while we're in the shop is keep an eye on your 2x2 knives. Make sure they're fixed properly. Make sure there's no wobble in them. You can see a lot of impact in the ear. If one of those knives wobble over and gets too close to the row, you can cause some burn from the 28. So keep an eye on that. That's always one good thing to make sure that you're checking, and that's something that you can't fix out during the year. So you want to make sure that that's taken care of before the year starts. Next is you need protection from nature. So that seed treatment that we put on it, does a lot of good work between the fungicide and the insecticide, preventing things, Pythium infections, seed corn maggots, which we saw a lot of last year. So that seed treatment is going to help protect it from Mother Nature. And then finally, you need that good seed bed. So, making sure that you're working the ground at the proper time. It's not going to get too chunky on you. Making sure you have good seed to soil contact. And then when you're out in the field, it doesn't just stop when you drop the planter in the ground and you go. Make sure to keep an eye on the equipment, and then keep an eye on that seed bed, making sure you're not getting into wet spots and causing sidewall compaction. And to show some pictures of what some of that'll look like, those emergence issues, so soil crusting, that's a common issue that you'll see, especially if we get a lot of rain and then it turns nice and the sun comes out and then it turns hot. You'll get that crust out there. So hopefully we won't have to deal with that too much. Sidewall compaction, this is a very good example of what can happen with sidewall compaction. So that ground is just packed in there like concrete, and then that corn plant is just trying to push out, and that mesocotyl is just pushing and pushing and pushing, and it just can't get it out, and this guy's not going to make it. So keeping an eye out for sidewall compaction while you're out there. Ambitional chilling. So that's when the corn plant soaks up water that's less than 50 degrees, I believe, so cold water. What it does is it shocks the seed and essentially just shuts off all growth. So if you see cold rain coming within the next day or two, my recommendation, just shut the planter down. It's not worth it. We want to make sure that corn is going to be out there. It's going to be able to get going. And if it gets that cold shot of rain early in the year, that crop could be toast. So it's not worth the risk, in my opinion. So then you have pests. You have wireworms and seed corn maggots. We did see a lot of seed corn maggots last year. You're going to see more of those pests on no-till ground and where there's a lot of heavy plant residue or manure. So a lot of organic matter, a lot of stuff like that. They like these bugs, these early season bugs, they like dead, rotting, stinky things. So that's where you're going to see a lot of the pressure, but just keep an eye out for it. Luckily, our treatment does give a little bit of insecticide protection against it. So, but if we have a cold season and we get planted early, that insecticide can wear off eventually with time. And if the plant's not growing fast enough to outpace these bugs, then that's when it can be a concern. So diseases, here's a good picture of Pythium. Most of the diseases that are going to hurt us early in the year are going to infect the mesocotyl here. And so like I said earlier, when this mesocotyl dies, that's the lifeline to this young corn plant, is it needs this mesocotyl here transferring nutrients from the seed into the plant until it can get enough where it can turn into its own factory. So luckily fungicides will protect against that, but it is still a potential threat out there. So keep an eye out for it. So that's what I have in terms of agronomy updates. I did want to share a little bit of data that we have. How am I doing on time? Oh, I got plenty of time. I don't need to go nearly as fast as I'm going. So here's some interesting data that came out of one of our TDRs over to our west over in Illinois. So interesting study. So they planted corn and soybeans across multiple dates for 2 years to evaluate when's the best time to plant what. So what they've determined is all here on the slide. So this is 2 years worth of data. You can see that the blue line here is corn and the orange line is soybeans. You can see that soybeans is much more forgiving in terms of retaining yield potential without having planting date influencing it too much. So you can see that it's a much flatter curve. So that means you have a bigger window to catch as much yield as you can. Whereas with corn, you can see it's really steep. So you plant early and you have some stand issues. It's going to drop down. So you have a really small target with corn in terms of how to optimize your yield potential there based off of planting date. So it's pretty interesting to see. So through this data, you can determine, when you're trying to determine what to plant when, the general recommendation out of this is you want to plant soybeans. You want to start with soybeans until those soil conditions are perfect for corn. And then you switch over, you plant all your corn, and then you finish with beans. That's the best way to optimize it. Now, again, I know this isn't the most practical way. If you have a single planter, nobody likes changing everything over multiple times throughout the year. Typically you want to start with corn, finish with beans. I get that. It's not always ideal, but based off the data we're seeing, starting with soybeans first, and then when the ground can, soybeans are a little bit more forgiving. So starting with soybeans and then switching to corn, where you can finish much more for having planting in the margin conditions. So the big thing is, in my opinion, it's just spreading risk throughout the planting season. So rather than putting all your eggs in the early season basket, you're going to want to kind of spread that out, because at the end of the day, there's always that one date that is ideal for planting, and you never know what it is until October. So trying to spread your risk and making sure that you're catching as much as you can is really the best option that you can manage. So here's some interesting data that I pulled. It's just some 2021 corn replant info. So this is just showing when a lot of our replant claims were last year. So you can see big spike here around the middle or the end of April. Big spike. A lot of that was stemmed from that late cold weather that we had. We had that snowstorm here, I don't know, third week April last year, I think. And I think that's what drove a lot of that. So just interesting data to see. And then soybeans, you can see it's a little more sporadic. We had frost multiple times. We had that cold weather, but you can see it kind of shows the similar pattern. But then really what you can notice is as the year goes on, they start to die off. So here's some more data that I got out of that in terms of replant decisions. So when we're looking to make that replant decision, you're trying to figure out, all right, what you planted out there, what's left, and then do you need to go out and throw more seed on the field to try to get that yield up? And from this data, it's really interesting. So they planted all the beans in March. And then obviously the stand was thinned out. So I think they planted at 140. They planted at 140. The stands got thinned out to about 80. And then they decided to replant half of it, added another about 50,000 onto it, and evaluated yield from there. And so as you can see is the March planting without adding more seed without replanting actually yielded more than coming back in and adding more seed during the year. So I thought it was pretty interesting data to show. So for the most part, holding on and I know it's hard to see the beans look ugly, but if you can hold on and not make the decision, a lot of times you can get a better result than you'd expect. So I thought that was pretty interesting data there to share. So finally, to wrap things up here, I just wanted to do a seasonal outlook. So I pulled this out of the NOAA website. So showing that what things are going to look like for us going into this planting season. So we're going to be a little bit above temperature is what they're calling for, at least from through April. We're going to be slightly above temperature. And then we're going to get a little bit more rainfall than normal. So we'll see what that turns into. But it's always good to take an eye and see what we're going to be what cards we're going to be dealt this year. So when we're looking at the 3-month outlook, so this is taking us through May, we're slightly more above average for temperature, still well above average for rainfall. So we'll see what this is going to turn into, but I thought it was interesting to see. And then when we look at the drought outlook, over to the left here, this is our drought outlook last year. So you can see that we were quite dry in a lot of Michigan and parts of northern Indiana. And you can see all that drought has been lifted, so we're doing much better. So still other parts of the country are dry, but for the most part, our territory is looking really good. So final things to wrap up with, just a couple plot reminders for those that are putting plots out. So we have 5 new products from 100 day to 108. We got 2 new products from 109 to 116. So a little bit thinner. 42D843 or 840A843 is going to be our internal check. So that one needs to be in every plot. I know we've had it for years. We know how it does, but I'd really like to see that in every single plot that we have. It's just a really good measure for when we're trying to gauge these new products. So our competitors, we're going to have Pioneer, Bex, and Dairyland. When we had our dealer meetings throughout the last month, we kind of shared the products that they are, but if you're interested in what they're going to be, send me a text message or give me a call. I'll let you know. We're looking at the XtendFlex plots. We're having Pioneer and Bex E3 are going to be our competitor checks. As a reminder, we want to avoid using XtendiMax and XtendiMax pre-plant. It's going to ding up those enlist checks. But if that does happen to the folks that are here, make sure you keep a couple extra varieties to replace those E3s if that happens. So if they throw XtendiMax down early for pre-plant, we're going to have to throw out the E3s and put in a couple more XtendiMax varieties or XtendFlex varieties. Sorry. So other than that, that is what I had for my pre-plant reminders. So